Hello. Today I'm going to be speaking to you about generosity. Woo! The money talk. This is the talk that I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily want to give, and it's also the one that sometimes people don't necessarily want to hear. But I'm actually so excited to be talking to you guys about generosity because it has played such an important part in my life. I'll share a little more about that later. But I do want to say right off the bat that throughout the course of this, when I'm talking about generosity, I am talking about money, and that's what Jesus talked a lot about, but it goes so much deeper than that. When I say generosity and talk about giving, I'm talking about giving of what you have to give, whatever that looks like. So it could be any of your resources, your time, your talents and skills, your treasure, which could include your money. It could be giving of your being, your emotions, your energy and enthusiasm. It could be giving of your words and your affection and your attention. So I just want to kind of reframe it in that way before I get started. So what is generosity? I was really surprised when I was looking up things about generosity to find that there is an entire many year ongoing study at a university, the University of Notre Dame in the US. And I was surprised to find it. It's called the Science of Generosity Initiative. And they have a lot of information, a lot to say about generosity, as you might think, including a history of the word generosity. If you know me, you know I love history. I love a good origin story. So here we go, the origin of the word generosity. It derives from the Latin word generosus, which means of noble birth. Did anyone else see that going there? I didn't when I looked it up. I had no clue that generous stemmed from being of noble birth. But up to the 16th century, I will say, it tended to mean that in the English language. But during the 17th century, the meaning and the use began to change. So generosity came to identify not literal family heritage, but a nobility of spirit, originally thought to be associated with those who were born to nobility. And that means the various admirable qualities that came with that. Then during the 18th century, the meaning of generosity continued to evolve, and it became more specific and more of what we think of as the contemporary definition of generosity, which is meaning being open-handed and having a bit of liberality in terms of giving of your money and possessions to others. So thanks for taking that little side trip with me. I find it very interesting. Hopefully you did too. As part of this Science of Generosity initiative, a book has been written called The Paradox of Generosity. It was written by Christian Smith, who is a professor of sociology at Notre Dame, and he also leads this initiative. And it was also written by Hilary Davidson, who is a PhD student in the program. And for 11 years, they have studied different quantifiable forms of generosity. So tithing, volunteer hours, relational kindness, the way you can be generous in relationship with others. And they've studied this and the impact that it has on the lives of those engaging in generous behavior. And here's what they found. Generous people tend to be happier, healthier. They tend to live longer, have lower levels of depression and anxiety. They tend to be more interested in personal growth. They tend to have better long-term relationships and a greater sense of meaning and overall purpose to their lives. I mean, that sounds good, doesn't it? That sounds really good. I want that. This is a quote that they have to say. Generosity is paradoxical. Those who give receive back in turn. By spending ourselves for others' well-being, we enhance our own standing. In letting go of some of what we have, we ourselves move towards flourishing. This is not only a philosophical or religious teaching, it is a sociological fact. In failing to care for others, we do not properly take care of ourselves. Now, this definition that they've given in this quote definitely falls in line with one of the many things Jesus quoted saying about money, which was that it is more blessed to give than to receive. And in that verse, the word blessed comes from the Greek word for happy. So he's literally saying there is more happiness in giving than in receiving. And that is definitely countercultural. It was then when he said it, and I think it still is now. So Jesus had a lot to say about generosity. I even made a joke before the gathering that I could have just stood up here and it could have taken 20 minutes just to read all the verses in the Bible that there are about generosity, which would have been funny for me, but probably not so fun for you guys. Would have been easier, but here we are. Jesus had a lot to say about generosity, specifically about money. In fact, I think they've estimated that 25% of what he had to say was about money, which puts generosity in the top 5 things that Jesus spoke about the most. But it has so much more to do with than just money. It had to do with the condition of the human heart. We'll rewind for just a second. In Genesis, back in the beginning, the world started with a generous God who provided everything that was needed. There was nothing but abundance mentality. Now, this abundance mentality means living from a place of abundance, seeing God as a generous host who's provided everything that we need, seeing a world full of things that we need, full of plenty, and we are able and willing to share in that. And throughout the Old Testament, starting almost from the beginning, like I think chapter 2 of the whole Bible, with the story of Adam and Eve, there is a shift from this gratefully receiving the gift of life and abundance from a generous provider to taking life and knowledge as a scarce resource that we desire or that we deserve to have. And this is scarcity mentality, which is living from a place of scarcity, seeing a world of lack, seeing too many people, not enough resources, where we enter into this fierce battle to fight for what we want or what we think we deserve, in the long run, becoming blind to those around us in need. We see proof of this scarcity mentality throughout the Old Testament. We get stories like Cain and Abel, Joseph being sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. We see Pharaoh's unwillingness to let the Hebrew slaves go. And then the story of the Israelites becomes one of a whole people who turn from oppressed to oppressors, people who fail time and again to trust God's provision in their lives, and they take what they can, when they can, regardless of the consequences. Throughout, there's this same scarcity mindset that God can't be trusted, that he is holding something back from us, that maybe there isn't enough to go around, so we should just take matters into our own hands and take care of ourselves. And then in walks Jesus. He comes into this story at a time when the Israelites are back to being oppressed, this time by the Romans, and the same scarcity mindset is running rampant. And Jesus chose an unlikely, maybe to their way of thinking or our way of thinking, but not to his way of thinking. He chose an unlikely group of people to call out on this. In Luke 11, Jesus addresses the Pharisees. These were people who knew the law, knew what they were supposed to do. They were very strict about following it, but often they only did things for show. Their outside actions didn't match their interior motives, and Jesus calls them on it. So it says this: while Jesus was speaking, a Pharisee asked him to dine with him, so he went and reclined at the table. The Pharisee was astonished to see that he didn't first wash before dinner. This isn't like a hygiene thing of wash your hands because you've been outside playing or something. It is a ritual that they didn't understand why Jesus wasn't doing. And Jesus said to him, "Now you Pharisees cleanse the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness. You fools, did he who not make the outside also make the inside? But now as for what is inside you, be generous to the poor, and everything will be clean for you. But woe to you Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and every herb, and neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter without leaving the former undone." Whew, Jesus packs a punch, like usual. So he makes his point so beautifully in a way that we can all picture. He cares so much about their heart posture. He's saying, why are you cleaning the outside when really what's inside needs to be cleaned up first? All you do is the washing of the outside, but you're full of greed. You can tithe and do all the right things and still have a hard heart. You can be acting from a place of spiritual vanity. And Jesus was saying, I care about this. I care about the integrity of the inside motives matching the outside appearance or effort. And this is also actually backed up by research from the Science of Generosity Initiative. They found that generous acts weren't enough, but generous practices, a lifestyle, living a life of generosity, is what showed the quantifiable difference in their research. They had this to say: generosity cannot be faked in order to achieve some other, more valued, self-serving end. Generosity itself needs to be desired. The good of other people must be what we want. Jesus probably could have picked from any number of ritualistic standards that the Pharisees held, but he turned it from washing to money, because generosity is a practice that actively moves us away from the greed and injustice of a scarcity mindset. It's actively putting aside our own resources for the good of others, and it's something that moves us back to an abundance mentality, a mindset where we trust that God has enough for us and that we know that his provision is enough. And we can know this through the lens of one of the most well-known verses in the whole Bible, John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave. He gave. That was his act of love, the biggest act of love. God is the same faithful, generous, loving Father who created an abundance. That is who he is. He's the one who has seen the state of the world. He's seen the state of our hearts taken over by this scarcity mentality, and he has continued to pour out abundance upon abundance on us in the form of Jesus. Jesus knew what it was like to live with little, to give up comforts and to live amongst people who were looking out for only themselves. And he constantly pushed against this. Jesus came and gave his life. For us, for love, think to love is to will the good of another person, to set aside our own selves and whatever that looks like, to see good for them. This act of generosity from Jesus turned death into life, and it's the reason that we can set aside scarcity and step into abundance. I said earlier that generosity has played an important role in my story. When I was in secondary school, my family went through a really difficult time, and in the midst of all of it, I felt very alone. I felt abandoned, and I felt like I wasn't worthy of my family's time and attention, and if I wasn't worthy of my family's time and attention, how could I be worthy of other people's time and attention? It was in this time that I felt I had a choice. On one path, I could seek that attention elsewhere. I could take care of myself and leave everyone else to take care of themselves. Basically, I was headed towards living a scarcity mindset. The other choice was to lean into my faith, to accept who God said that I was and to let that be enough, to hear from him that I was worthy of the time and attention that I felt like I was lacking because of who I am as his child, that there was a life of abundance that he had for me. And I honestly believe that the reason I didn't take that path of scarcity mentality was because of the generosity that other people showed in my life at that time. Other people came alongside me. They were generous with their time. I have friends who are generous with their affection and their words, speaking truth into me. There were families in my church who showed amazing hospitality. They invited me to come for meals or just to come spend time with them as a family, which is something I was so deeply craving in that time. So people being generous to me was absolutely life-changing, and it set me on the path that I'm on now. And I'm sure that I'm not alone. I'm sure we all have stories that we can think of in our lives when generosity has changed the course that we were walking. Times that it has pulled us back from walking towards a scarcity mentality and walking into a mentality of abundance and the fact that there is enough, the idea that there is enough. And in my life, generosity definitely didn't stop there. For the last 5 years, I've lived entirely off of the generosity of other people who have sponsored me to live here in the UK, to work with uni students, and now to work for Anchor. I love the picture that this shows of the whole body of Christ, that there's people all the way over in America who are a part of students' lives here in Birmingham, who are part of me standing here right now. I think that's pretty amazing to see the way the body of Christ works like that when we come at it from a place of abundance mentality, when we are willing and able to give. I've been blessed by people here at Anchor as well, some of whom are in this room who have messaged or called me out of the blue just because they were faithfully and freely and obediently giving of what God has given them, whether it was money or words of encouragement. because they were acting out of an abundance mindset. So my life has been so changed by this. And yeah, I doubt there's a person in this room who could say that that isn't the case for them as well. So what does it look like for us to then take this thing that has been so impactful for so many people and actively point it in a direction and use it? I think for me, it's important to note that generosity as a practice is a formation. By that, I mean, I can ask myself, who am I becoming through the act of giving, through this practice of giving, through this act of generosity? Who am I becoming? Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This is a really good window into where our hearts are. Where are those resources I talked about earlier going? Maybe ask that question, and if you don't like the answer, change it, and your heart will follow. Maybe ask the question, how is God breaking your heart, and how can you respond? If you have a hard time with that question or feeling connected to what God's doing, giving is also a great way to fight apathy, to become invested in what he's doing. Chris read earlier this verse from Micah, and I think that it's been really impactful for me. I think one of the reasons I love this verse is because it's in my university's creed. I don't know, that's a really random fact that I thought you might want to know. So one of those things that as soon as you start going to the university, when you're going through your, what is it? It's not training. What is it called when you, orientation? Yeah, that's what it's called. You learn the creed, and this is one that has stuck with me, and it has Micah 6, verse 8 in it as well, that we are to, not bring God all of these things. What he wants is our heart posture to be aimed towards him. What does it look like for us to generously act justly? In giving, we are a part of fighting injustice. We are a part of putting things that have been made wrong right through what God has given us. In loving mercy, we see the ways that God has been generous to us, and we want to be part of seeing that for other people. In walking humbly, we lay ourselves down to be a part of what God is doing, playing our role in the body of Christ. Now, I think most of the practices we've been talking about can be enriched by community, except maybe solitude. That might be the only one that can't. But I think it's especially true for generosity. How can we as Anchor be a generous community? And not just in how we give, although we do, but how do we as individuals shape a community that's generous in our hospitality, in our words, and yes, in our giving? How can we be people who give dignity and honor to others through our actions and our words? How can we be part of encouraging others to live from a place of abundance, of trusting God? And there's two amazing examples of this in the Bible that I want to share about before I finish. The first is in the Old Testament, in Exodus. God has just brought the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, and he gives them instructions through Moses on how to build the tabernacle, his resting place amongst his people. And y'all, it was a big undertaking. It's like a bunch of measurements. It's really boring to read, but it's also really interesting to see the way, the care and dedication that they put into it. Because they had just seen God do this amazing thing of bringing them out, they were living from an abundance mentality. They were able to act out of a place of abundance, and they brought what they had to contribute. For some, it was just material like wood or cloth. For others, it was bringing gold and silver and gems. And for some, it was just bringing their talents, like being able to cut gems and embroider and weave and carpentry and other things as well. So this is in Exodus 36, 2 through 7. I'll just read it from here. So Moses summoned I should have figured out how to say these names before I got up here. I feel like everyone has this issue, right? Not just me. So these names, Moses summoned them. And every skilled person in whose heart the Lord had placed wisdom, all whose hearts moved them, to come to the work and do it. They took from Moses' presence all the contributions that the Israelites had brought for the task of making the sanctuary. Meanwhile, the people continued to bring free will offerings morning after morning. Then all the artisans who were doing all the work for the sanctuary came one by one from the work they were doing and said to Moses, "The people are bringing more than is needed for the construction of the work the Lord has commanded to be done. After Moses gave an order, they sent a proclamation throughout the camp. Let no man or woman make anything else as an offering for the sanctuary. So the people stopped. The materials were sufficient for them to do all the work. There was more than enough. I love that. There was more than enough. That's especially encouraging to me as we are looking to build, or, not build, maybe move into our own tabernacle, to see that there was more than enough because of the generosity of people living from this abundance mindset. The second example of this in the Bible comes from the New Testament in Acts. This section in my Bible, at least, is titled Generous and Growing Church. So it's Acts 2:42-47. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and signs were being performed through the apostles. Now all the believers were together and held all things in common. They sold their possessions and property and distributed the proceeds to all as any had need. Every day they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple, and they broke bread from house to house. They ate their food with joyful and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And every day the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. I love that. There's a reason that generous and growing go together in this, because being invited into an abundance mentality, it is so countercultural to what we find anywhere else. It's such an amazing opportunity to bring other people into the fold, and that's something that we can do as Anchor. The early church lived from this place of confidence and security, sure that God would meet all their needs. Instead of holding their possessions tightly out of fear, they shared with one another. And I think they could do this because every day they were looking at it through the lens of what Jesus had done, what Jesus had given. Every day they broke bread. That means they took communion every day. And they proclaimed his death and resurrection and the abundance of life, the life to the full that he gave. When we remember this, we remember that God can be trusted, that he keeps his promises. And it's my hope and prayer for Anchor that we as individuals and we as Anchor together as a community, that we can always remember his gifts, that we can always remember to model this generosity, that we can be part of sharing an abundance mentality with other people who are out there just fighting to take and get what they can, and how much freedom there is in living a life of abundance that only comes from God. So I'm going to pray to close us. God, I thank you so much for your constant and continued generosity towards me. That I can come at generosity from a place of obedience and joy and free will, and not from a place of necessity or obligation or religiosity, that I can come at it just from a knowledge of the way that you've moved in my life and wanting to see that in the lives of other people. Thank you for the life and the freedom and the open-handed living I get when I can trust in you and your provision of my life, the knowledge that we are vessels constantly emptied to be refilled, but that you always do refill, that you always follow through on that abundance that you promise us. Thank you so much, God.